Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with another notable name in Arab American history. This was meant to be Mondays, but we are looking at Steve Jobs. Yes, he has Arab American descendancy. Oh, goodness, excuse me. Anyway, Steve Jobs, 1976, co-founded Apple with Steve Wozniak, the Woz. Under Jobs' guidance, the company pioneered a series of revolutionary technologies, including the iPhone and the iPad. Not before being forced to leave and then coming back later. That's when he introduced the iPhone and iPad. But we'll get to that. He was an inventor, designer, and entrepreneur who was the co-founder, chief executive, and chairman of Apple. Born in 1955 to two University of Wisconsin graduate students who gave him up for adoption, Jobs was smart but directionless, dropping out of college and experimenting with different pursuits before co-founding Apple with Steve Wozniak in 1976. He would leave the company in 1985, launching Pixar Animation Studios and then returning to Apple more than a decade later. The tech giant's revolutionary products include the iPhone, iPad, and iPod. Jobs would die in 2011 following a long battle with pancreatic cancer. He was born February the 24th, 1955, Stephen Paul Jobs, in San Francisco, California. To Joanne Scheibel, later Joanne Simpson, and Abdul Fattah Jandali, two University of Wisconsin graduate students. They would give the son up for adoption, who at this point didn't even have a name, and as an infant he would be adopted by Clara and Paul Jobs and named Stephen Paul Jobs. Clara was an accountant and Paul was a Coast Guard veteran and machinist. Jobs' biological father, Jandali, was a Syrian political science professor. His biological mother worked as a speech therapist. Shortly after Jobs was placed for adoption, his biological parents married and had another child, Mona Simpson. It was not until Jobs was 27 that he was able to uncover information on who his actual biological parents were. He lived with his adoptive family in Mountain View, California, within the area that would later become known as Silicon Valley. Let's see. According to the BBC science-focused magazine, Jobs was taken to the emergency room twice as a toddler, once from sticking a pin into an electrical socket and burning his hand, and another time because he had ingested poison. He had already been taught to read by the time he started kindergarten. So it's clear he's actually pretty intelligent as is. As a boy, he and his dad worked on electronics in the family garage. John showed his son how to take apart and reconstruct electronics, a hobby that instilled confidence, tenacity, and mechanical prowess in a young Jobs. Although he was intelligent and innovative as a thinker, his youth was riddled with frustrations over formal schooling. He was a prankster in elementary school due to boredom, and his fourth grade teacher needed to bribe him to study. He tested so well, however, that administrators wanted to skip him ahead to high school, a proposal that his parents declined. So, again, very intelligent as an individual, clearly. While attending Homestead High School, he joined the Explorers Club at Hewlett Packard. There he saw a computer for the first time, and even picked up a summer job with Hewlett Packard after calling company co-founder Bill Hewlett to ask for parts for a frequency counter he was building. It was at HP that a teenage Steve Jobs would meet his future partner and co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, who was attending the University of California, Berkeley. After high school, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and lacking direction, he withdrew from college after 6 months and spent the next year and a half dropping in on creative classes at the school. He would later recount how one course in calligraphy developed his love of typography. If you don't know what calligraphy is, it's the beautiful swaying writing that you see in some older texts. But it's like a beautiful art in the way of writing. So, 1974, he would take a position as a video game designer with Atari. Several months later, he would leave the company to find spiritual enlightenment in India, traveling further and experimenting with psychedelic drugs. He would, in 1976, at the age of 21, he and Woz would start Apple Computer in Jobs' family garage. He sold his Volkswagen bus and Wozniak his beloved scientific calculator to fund their entrepreneurial venture. Through Apple, the men are credited with revolutionizing the computer industry by democratizing the technology and making machines smaller, cheaper, intuitive, and accessible to everyday consumers. Up to this point, home computers were not a thing. Even at a little after, home computers were a rarity. But Jobs and Woz, with their development in Apple, would make computers that were built for the everyday person. All your other computers built were usually IBM supercomputers that filled rooms and stuff. But Jobs would be at the forefront of helping change that succession. Was conceived of a series of user-friendly personal computers, and with Jobs in charge of marketing, Apple initially marketed the computers for $666.66 each. The Apple I earned the corporation around $774,000. 3 years after the release of Apple's second model, the Apple II, the company's sales increased exponentially to 139 million. In 1980, Apple became a publicly traded company. So they're gaining notoriety already and gaining success. It would be valued a market value of $1.2 billion by the end of the first day of trading. However, the next several products from Apple suffered significant design flaws, resulting in recalls and consumer disappointment. IBM suddenly surpassed Apple in sales, and Apple had to compete with an IBM PC dominated business world. Yeah, most of your computers, military, business, scientific, stuff like that. Again, most computers weren't personal computers. He would look to John Scully of Pepsi Cola to take over the role of CEO for Apple in '83, and the next year Apple would release the Macintosh. Very, very, very popular model, marketing the computer as a piece of counterculture lifestyle, romantic, youthful, creative. Despite positive sales and performance superior to IBM's PCs, the Macintosh was still not IBM compatible. Scully believed Jobs was hurting Apple, and the company's executives began to phase him out. And not actually having had an official title in the company he co-founded, he was pushed into more marginalized positions and left Apple in 1985. Let's see. He would invest $12 million to begin a new hardware and software enterprise called Next Inc. The company introduced its first computer in '88. Jobs hoping it would appeal to universities and researchers. But its base price, it was far out of the range of most potential buyers. The company's operating system Next Step fared better, with programmers using it to develop top video games like Quake and Doom. Tim Berners-Lee, who created the first web browser, used in Next computer. However, the company would still struggle to appeal to mainstream America, and Apple eventually bought the company in 1996 for $429 million. 1986, Jobs would purchase an animation company from George Lucas, which later became Pixar Animation Studios. Studio would go on to produce popular movies like Toy Story in '95, Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, and Up. It would merge with Disney in 2006, making Jobs the largest shareholder of Disney. As of June 2022, Pixar films had collectively grossed $14.7 billion at the global box office. 1997, Jobs would return to his post as Apple's CEO, and he would be credited with revitalizing the company in the 1990s. This is when we start seeing a lot of the hardware Apple's known for. Um, he would have a self-imposed annual salary of $1 a year, and uh, produce products like the iMac, and had effective branding campaigns and stylish designs, catching the attention of consumers once again. He would later introduce products like the MacBook Air, iPad, and iPhone, all of which, or iPod and iPhone, all of which dictated the evolution of technology. So, yeah, like I said, at the forefront. In 2008, fueled by iTunes and iPod sales, Apple became the second biggest music retailer in America, behind Walmart. Because up until that point, Walmart sold CDs and tapes of pretty much any musician or music, and that's where you were going to go to find your music. Apple had also been ranked number one on Fortune's list of America's most admired companies. Yeah, Apple has released dozens of versions of the iPhone since its 2007 debut. In February 2023, an unwrapped first generation iPhone sold at auction for more than $63,000. Jobs' net worth peaked at $8.3 billion shortly before he died in 2011. And it's been suggested by celebrity net worth estimates it was as high as $10.2 billion. So, yeah. According to the New York Post, Jobs sold off all but one of his Apple shares when he left the company in 1985. Which, if he'd held on to the initial stake in the company that he got in 1980, it would have been worth about $330 billion. So, yeah. Most of Jobs' net worth came from roughly 8% of his roughly 8% share in Disney he acquired when he sold Pixar. Based on Disney's 2022 value, that share, which he passed on to his wife, is worth $22 billion. He would marry Lauren Powell on March the 18th, 1991. They would have 3 children: Reed, Aaron, and Eve. Jobs would also foster a daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, with girlfriend Kristen Brennan in 1978 when he was 23. So yeah, married Lauren in 91, but way back in 78, he fathered a child with the mother whom he did not marry. So he denied paternity of his daughter in court. claiming he was sterile. 2003, Jobs discovered that he had a neuroendocrine tumor, a rare but operable form of pancreatic cancer. Instead of immediately opting for surgery, Jobs chose to alter his pesco-vegetarian diet while weighing Eastern treatment options. For 9 months, he postponed surgery, making Apple's board of directors nervous. Executives feared that shareholders could pull their stock if word got out that the CEO was ill, but in the end, Jobs' confidentiality took precedence over shareholder disclosure. 2004, he had successful surgery to remove the pancreatic tumor, but in early 2009, reports circulated about his weight loss, some predicting his health issues had returned, which included a liver transplant. He would go on a 6-month leave of absence. And yeah. And then sent an email message out to employees that the health issues were more complex than he thought, and named Tim Cook, who I believe still is in charge of Apple, as its then chief operating officer. But yeah. He was there for the unveiling of the iPad. But he would eventually pass on at the age of 56, October 5th, 2011. So, yeah. But Steve Jobs, like I said, at the forefront of the computer revolution. Before people like Jobs and Woz and others, your computers were supercomputers that were used by the military, government, corporations. Yeah. The average everyday person did not have need or could afford one. So, yeah. But yeah, like we've already explained, he was born to Joanne Carol Scheibel and Abdul Fattah Jean Jandali, who himself was born to a Muslim household of wealthy Syrian parents, the youngest of 9 siblings. So yeah, Steve Jobs has Syrian descent. Half Syrian, so yeah. But yeah, That will be the end of this episode, though. So, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my sources and links in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.